Okay, last Wednesday night we left Ezra in 458 BC after having faced the problem of, again, sin with intermarriage and intermingling with the surrounding idolaters, those who didn't believe. And we left Ezra in the midst, hopefully, of a revival. 13 years later, Nehemiah gets a report in chapter 1 from his brothers and some other men who had been in Jerusalem and Judah about what has happened in the last 13 years since Ezra was there. And the news is not good at all. The walls were in terrible shape. The people were distressed and in great difficulty. The people had been rebuilding the walls according to Ezra 4:12, but they were stopped. And Nehemiah in verse 4 was just grief-stricken at the terrible news that he had received of the dire situation that existed 13 years after Ezra had left in 458, and we are now in 445 BC. Now, Nehemiah serves in the royal court of Artaxerxes as a cupbearer, one who has great trust with the king, free access to the king, and so a very high position. And when he hears this distress, I think 3 weeks later, chapter 2 is where we're going to begin. He hears about it in the winter of 445 BC, and that month is called Chislev. Chapter 1, verse 1. That is November or / December in our calendar. And in chapter 2, it's the month Nisan, which I believe is the first month or the springtime of the same year, the first month of one of two, incidentally, Jewish calendars. So you have to try to figure out which calendar these writers are using. But it is now March or April 444 BC, and we don't know the reason for the delay. But perhaps he felt that it wasn't the right time to approach Artaxerxes about the situation back in his hometown. But in verse 2, as he is serving Artaxerxes, the Persian king notices that Nehemiah is acting very sad and downhearted, and questions him about it. And Nehemiah was fearful because royal officials did not want anyone showing any negative emotions in the court. And I guess a Persian subject was expected to be perfectly content so long as he was seeking the happiness of the king that he worked for. And so Nehemiah's upcoming request to leave the court was a serious matter. He explained in verse 3 that his home city lay in ruins, and further that was the tombs of his fathers, which almost all kingdoms regarded with great honor, their tombs of their forefathers. And the king asked in verse 4, well, what do you want, Nehemiah? And Nehemiah, before he tells him what he wants, utters a short, silent prayer before he requested a royal commission from Artaxerxes to travel to Judah to try to rebuild his home city. Artaxerxes, I think, during this asked how long you're going to stay, and how long did he stay? Does anybody know? He stays about 12 years on his first, what we think is his one of two instances where he goes back to Jerusalem. But he stays 12 years, and you can look that up in chapter 5, verse 14. And I am sure that Nehemiah knew about the recent decree that Artaxerxes himself in Ezra 4:21 had issued, that this work in Jerusalem must stop until I issue another command before it can restart. And what he was asking him to do was to reverse a previous decree that Artaxerxes had already ordered from Ezra 4 to stop that work in Jerusalem. Artaxerxes in verse 6, like I said, questioned how long he was going to be gone. And we don't have Nehemiah's answer to that. We just have the fact that Artaxerxes said, okay, I'll let you return. Nehemiah in chapter 7 asked for letters, royal letters, so that he would have safe passage on the way. And he asked even Artaxerxes to provide him with provisions for the journey. And he asked for an official letter to secure building materials from wherever the king's forest is. We're not sure if it was located around Jerusalem or perhaps he was talking about Lebanon. We don't know. Verse 8, Nehemiah gives God the credit for the king graciously granting his request. Now, the king's permission for Nehemiah to return to Jerusalem, I say apparently, includes a commission for him to serve as governor. Because in chapter 5, verse 14, he is referred to as the governor. We have no record of his appointment, but we suspect, and that's all it is, that Artaxerxes, for him to be able to carry out the commission that the royal decree involved, gave him the governorship, at least while he was there. And he refers to also in verse 8 to the house to which I will go, and probably talking about the governor's residence. Okay, verses 9 through 20, it's about his journey to Jerusalem and his preparations to rebuild the city walls. And we learned that he took an armed escort with him, and Ezra had done what? Ezra went, he refused one. But I suspect that if he was commissioned as governor, that the king wanted to be sure that he had protection on his trip as a royal official back to Jerusalem. So I don't think this says that Nehemiah didn't have as much faith as Ezra did, but his trust was that God would make provisions for his trip, whatever those provisions were. Nehemiah's first hint of problems after he gets in Jerusalem in verse 10. Two officials were very upset that and I'll refer to him as a governor, that Nehemiah had arrived with royal credentials with him. And that was, of course, Sanballat and Tobiah, and we'll look a little bit closer at these two men a little bit later. Here shows him arriving officially in Jerusalem in verse 11, where after this long, arduous trip, he rests for 3 days. And Nehemiah in verses 12 through 16 had planned to take a secret inspection trip of the walls around Jerusalem. And so he inspects the walls at night, and he probably needed to find out exactly how bad is the situation with these walls. What is the scope of the work that's going to have to be done to get these walls rebuilt? He needed to examine the situation and make plans to get this job done. And he only took a few trusted men and one, I guess, donkey or horse. It just says animal in verse 12. And he wanted to do it secretly, and that's why he took only the few men and only one animal with him. Probably to avoid being detected by men who might have been spying for Sanballat and Tobiah, who were their enemies, obviously. And it was wise with enemies on every hand to keep his plan secret until he could see what the scope of the work was going to be. And he wanted to learn, is there any of this piles of rubble here that can be reused? Is there anything here that we can use? So he wanted to see for himself first, before I tell anybody why I'm here, to have it right in his mind, the size of the problem, the work that's got to be done, and lay out the plans to get it done. And that's, so he inspects the walls in verses 13 through 15. In verse 17 and 18, after he gets back, he presents to the problem to the people, and I'll paraphrase. He said, if you look at the situation around here, folks, now what had happened in the 13 years? What's the human reaction? You get used to it, and you become complacent to it, and that's where they were. Those walls had been torn down since 586 BC when Nebuchadnezzar's army tore it down. So we are about 130 years that those walls, remember they tried to start it during Ezra, but were stopped by this same king. So they had been laying in virtual ruin for 130 years. And the people had gotten used to it. So he's saying, look, take a look around here, look at this disastrous situation. And he challenged them to get busy and to join with me in getting these walls rebuilt. He gave them his personal testimony that God has been with me. He has been assured me of his presence and his power with me. And he used that to try to get them going. If he was with me and got this decree that Artaxerxes had already issued to stop the work, and he reversed that decree simply because I asked him to, then I can assure you that God is with me and with this plan to get these walls rebuilt. So they were thrilled to hear that probably. By the way, that decree is in Ezra 4:23 that we've already looked at. The date is August the 1st, 445 BC. So the people made a commitment to Nehemiah that they would get that wall rebuilt. Now in verses 19 through 20, when the opposition heard about the walls being rebuilt, they wanted to discourage and dishearten the workers by ridicule, mocking, and a little bit later, threats, anything they could do to discourage the people so that this did not get done. And we learn about Sanballat, who was probably a Moabite. Geshem was the Arab in there is probably an Arab governor of the country just across the Jordan River. And we would call him today a sheik. And Tobiah was appointed governor or a high official of the Ammonites. So Moab and Ammon were related how? They were brothers. And they were the sons of what man? Lot, correct. And they had had trouble with Israel ever since they were born. So this is not unusual to find one of each tribe and an Arab across the river, across the Jordan River, opposing everything that Nehemiah proposed. By the way, there's a scroll that they found in Egypt some years ago from this time telling us that Sanballat was the governor of Samaria, which is the area just north of Jerusalem. Now that's outside the Bible. So, after their enemies sought to discourage the people, Nehemiah gave them the answer that God's going to ensure that we have success, and then we're going to start rebuilding no matter what you say or what you do. And that you people out here who are trying to cause trouble and stop us have no business or concern or interest in us rebuilding this wall. Any questions on chapter 2? Did Nehemiah sound like he meant business? Yes, he does. He does. All right, chapter 3. We're getting right into, the people said, well, I'm ready. Nehemiah is ready, so they get started rebuilding that wall after 130 years of laying in ashes. And the Levites, verse 1, lead the way, and Nehemiah assigns everyone a specific place to work, usually near what? Their homes, usually near where they live. They would be more personally involved and motivated to do a good job. And of course, a lot of the houses were built right on the wall. And so they were very interested in making sure that wall was built quickly and strongly. And secondly, of course, they wouldn't have to travel from one part of the city to another to get to work, shall we say. Yes, it was the most efficient way. Yes, yes. And of course, if Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arab chieftain decided that they wanted to attack, they would have a personal interest in putting up the toughest fight possible because they were fighting for their own homes. And the whole task would be a family effort, and everybody would be vitally interested in rebuilding the wall. We start out in verses 1 and 2 with work on the northern wall and its gates, the sheep gates. And by the way, the name of the gates usually is connected with what's outside them. That's usually the connection. The location of some of these gates we still don't know, or the purpose we don't know. Verses 3 through 5, we told about the work on the fish gate. And we told in verse 5, the only negative here is that some high-ranking officials or nobles weren't really helping with the job. Yes?
You said that we don't really know. We don't know how many gates there were?
No, not for sure. Too much destruction, and there's been too many rebuilding efforts in the last 2,500 years. They're still working on excavating, by the way, along these walls, as much as when they can get permission. But no, we don't. We really don't.
This talks about a lot of setting the gates through this chapter.
Yes.
Gates.
Yes.
And they set the gate, and they set the gate. I didn't know.
We don't know. Verses 6 through 12 tells us about the work and those who were working on the old gate, whatever that is. And then we move in verse 13 over to the west wall, where we have the valley gate and the refuse gate. Now we can probably figure what the refuse gate went to. Remember the valley around Jerusalem on the west side that was used for trash and it was kept burning? Him, that was or some translations have dung gate, but it's where the garbage was carried out. And then on verses 15 through 32, we have the work on the eastern wall, which is the side facing the Mount of Olives. There's the fountain gate in 15, the water gate way down in verse 26. Verse 27 is a place called Ophel, which means a swelling or a bulge. And that was a place located between south of the temple, but north of Zion. Zion was the original small city at the southern tip of Jerusalem that who took originally? David. It was called originally the city of David. The horse gate in verse 28, the east gate in verse 29, the inspection gate in verse 31, and then we're all the way back in verse 32 to the sheep gate where we started. And it's just a list of names and responsibilities that they had to get started. List of builders working on the wall. Yes. Yeah, and I had it written down, Butch. But it's not written down in my memory. That's been erased. It seems like it was 2,000 or 3,000 either yards or feet. It wasn't that big. It wasn't that big. Nehemiah brought it in some, okay, to make it, for instance, on the east side of Jerusalem, there's a sharp drop off down into the valley, the Kidron Valley, that you go through and then up to the Mount of Olives. And the walls, as I remember, were close down at the bottom where the city, right at the bottom where the city met the cliff. Well, he moved them up to make the wall more secure and easier to defend, and thus made the entire wall smaller. Now, the wall got enlarged a couple of times later, but it seemed like it was 2,800 yards total around.
Lloyd, do you know roughly how many acres were inside the wall?
No, I do not. I'll find out for you, because I think I've read that too. It wasn't that big.
Because the acres is about the size of a football field, so we kind of relate to a football field and apply that.
Football field's 100 yards.
Yep, and
Yeah,
that field,
okay.
I think 3 yards wide.
Okay. Somebody that's good at math can probably figure if it's 2,800 feet around, or yards around, how many square feet are in it, or acres. I'm not that smart. What are you laughing at, Morgan? Okay. All right, any questions on all of the workers? Now, they're working not only on the walls, but the gates also. But apparently, they put the walls up first and then hung the gates last. All right, chapter 4. The opposition starts rearing its ugly head again, and their strategy starts out with making fun of the Jews, who were, by the way, weak, small, and vulnerable. They were just a few people over there and didn't even have a city with walls around it. So they were wide open. And so it was very easy to discourage these people because of their vulnerability. Verses 1 through 3, we see that how Sanballat, the Samaritan governor, got so mad and ridiculed the Jews before the officials, right in public. And we learn, well, why in the world would Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, the Arab, be so upset at what the Jews were doing? And in doing a little background reading, I found out that, unfortunately, regional governors were jealous of one another, trying to court favor with who? Artaxerxes. And they didn't like competition. It's bad enough they didn't like each other, probably. But when Nehemiah got there and threatened to make Judah something substantial, the other surrounding governors were not very happy with what was going on. Verse 2, let me paraphrase that. With their utterly inadequate materials and manpower, do they actually expect to carry this project through? And what is the use of offering sacrifices? Their God can't help them anyway, or they would never have been in this shape. Very powerful arguments to those people. And he talks in the last part of verse 2 about can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones? Now, if you've got burned stones or brick, they will what? They'll crumble. They are not suitable for use in a wall. And that's probably one of the things that Nehemiah checked on when he went around the walls that first, well, actually it was his 4th night in town. Yes, ma'am?
I was just gonna say, I looked it up,
Yeah.
and it says that Nehemiah's wall, was about 32 acres.
Covered 32 acres.
Nehemiah's wall.
Thank.
And that's according to
You mean it
biblical archaeology.
enclosed
Yes.
32 acres? Can somebody tell me something around here that's about that size? Now, my lot, my subdivision is an acre. So that is 32 of my lots. That shows you how small. I don't know how many lots in our subdivision in Boyd, but it's probably not.
A quarter section is a quarter of a mile.
Okay.
got a hay field that's got 28 acres in it. So I
Okay.
have a pretty good idea in my head
Okay,
about, so it'd be like 4 acres bigger, and there's a 5 acre field that joins it, so.
okay. Well, it gives you an idea of actually how small
Section of land
the
is
walls, the city was after Nehemiah enclosed it. Ed?
section of land is 640 acres. That's a mile square.
Thank you. Thank you, I didn't know that either.
Alabama's divided off like that, Tennessee is. They got divided off in sections, quarter sections, and 40s. 1640s in a section.
Okay,
If you
I'm
farmed,
speechless, I don't know about any of this.
if you farmed, you would understand that and appreciate it.
For surveying, oh, okay. Thanks, David. Okay. Okay, Steve?
40 times 4 is 160, 4 times 160, that's your 640, which is the section, so that's how that's big.
Okay.
Section township range.
Well, I feel like I've just undergone an education tonight. Didn't know about any of that. Okay.
If you had to dig down longer, you'd have all that in it, township and land. I carried a deed down in Scottsboro. They said that deed isn't worth the deed, it's worth the dime. I went up there and spaced it on one side of the highway and on the north of Willis Street, Cooper's Lane, on the west of the Crouch property, southwest of the Willis Creek, on the south of the Thomas property, back to the corner again. You can't put it down under this, that's a good deal.
Oh, okay.
But that deed has to be where the average Joe, anybody in the room, can take that deed, read it, and go find that property.
Really? Okay. That's the way all deeds should be, but I've run across some deeds in Tennessee that were just about
Of course, you have to
impossible.
have a whole county map, but you go down to the, FAS office that has all that. Then you go find the township, that's up Bridgeport, the section, well, that's 21, and the range. And then when you get that, you go to it, then you'll find, it might say County Road 98 to the east, and then County Road 571 west. You go up in that area towards Russell Cave with what I just told you, and you'll go to our acre.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Alabama was divided off from Tennessee, Bridgeport at one time. We said Tennessee, Colonel James Dawson, Major Dolan, and Andrew Jackson, so they got Jackson County.
Is that the door on the Orange Cove?
Tennessee, it helped get Jackson County named for Jackson, Andrew Jackson.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's go to verse 3. Tobiah's making fun of this meager wall these Jews are going to build, and said that if a fox ran across it, it would crumble. Nehemiah, when he hears statements like that, did what he does all the time, and he took Tobiah's insults, and shared the insults with the Lord. And he requested that the enemy reap what they are sowing, and he says, don't forgive him. I'm paraphrasing. Don't even forgive this man for what he is doing, because he is discouraging my people from getting the wall built. Verse 6, we learned that Nehemiah and the people just kept on working and got the wall completed up to half its height. Verses 7 through 9, they tried something else since the first strategy didn't work, of ridicule and mockery. They try a little bit of conspiracy and some devious plots to try to get the wall stopped. So in verse 8, they form an alliance and lay plans, supposedly secret, to attack Jews. The answer to frustrating the attack in verse 9 was to watch and pray. Strategy 3, verse 10. Again, discouragement and fatigue, I guess we'll call it. The people were starting to complain that they were what? It's in its form of a proverb. In verse 10, yeah, they're tired. And we'll find out how hard Nehemiah worked these folks a little bit later. Their complaint was that we just can't do it, and the combination of discouragement from working too hard and too long, and fear of invasion plots from 3 governors that surrounded them almost proved too much for God's people here. But verse 13 through 23, the answer to this problem is a strong commitment, despite the hardships under Nehemiah's great leadership. Verses 11 through 14, they try threats and intimidation again. In verse 12, the enemy spread a rumor that there's going to be a secret attack against Jerusalem. It's a secret attack, and their purpose was to make the hearts of the Jewish builders quake in fear. Now, in verse 12, it appears at the point of what is being said there. Let's read that, verse 12. When the Jews who lived near them being the enemies who are spreading this threat in the previous verse, and they told us 10 times, that means over and over and over again, quote, they will come up against us from every place where you may turn. And where were they spending their days? Building the walls, leaving their home towns or villages or farms or vineyards, what? Open and exposed. That seems to be the point of verse 12. So they threatened to quit manning the walls to go out there and defend their homes. And Nehemiah's response to that is in verse 13 was he armed the people. He stationed them at weak and exposed areas of the wall and posted them by families, probably near where they lived. In verse 14, he said, don't forget that God is with us. And Nehemiah assures them of the Lord's presence and power in this, despite the opposition that we seem to be surrounded by. Verse 15, we learn that God frustrated the enemy's plans by helping to prepare his people for anything that the enemy might throw against them. And in verse 16 down through verse 23, we see Nehemiah organizing the people for work and battle. And this is one of the, I'll go into each one of these because I think it's worth it. The people were divided into 2 groups. One stood guard, the other group worked. The officers in verse 16 stood guard behind the workers to make sure that the workers weren't ambushed. Verse 17, the people, all of them had weapons laying right beside them while working on the wall. And 18 tells us that Nehemiah had made arrangements that there would be a trumpet out there, and if one part of the wall underwent an attack, then they were to sound that trumpet, and everybody was to rush to that section of the wall that was under siege or attacked to defend it. He noted that we're awfully thin here. We're spread very thin. I think that's in verse 18. So the trumpet was so that they could immediately gather for battle at the sound of the trumpet. The people were assured by Nehemiah in verse 20 that God would fight for them. We may not have a lot of people. We may not have a lot of weapons, and we may be thin. But as long as God is on our side, we're going to get this wall built. Verse 21, the people were assigned to work long hours from first light until it was pitch dark, where they couldn't work any longer. And half the men were on guard at all times. The workers who lived, in verse 22, who lived outside the city, came inside the city to make sure, at night, to make sure that the city was guarded, and that there were guards posted all night long in verse 22. Verse 23, the people stood ready for battle and got that wall built 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we're going to have to quit there. I want you to know, they do get the wall built. So you can rejoice all this coming week because we're going to get it done. And how long is it going to take, Ed?
52 days.
You're right, 52 days, less than 2 months to get that wall built with the people there. Any questions or comments? Let's pray. Lord, for your energizing help and presence, we give you thanks as you were with Nehemiah and his people. We thank you for being with us through Jesus Christ our Lord and your Spirit, and we pray that we will rejoice that you are on our side and that we truly have nothing to fear. Be with us always in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much.